And welcome to another edition of the Nerdy Agent Podcast audio showing of the week.
It's when we talk about the audio showing stuff.
I don't have a song for this.
Josh and AJ just learned that you can unread iMessage text. So if anybody out there does not know that, all you have to do is hold down on the message from your messages, and then it pops up and you press
a game
mark as
changer.
unread.
You just changed
just like on
40,
emails.
You just changed 40 people's lives, Luke.
I did. Congratulations, guys.
400
I've been
people's
doing
lives.
this for 12 months, so you guys are behind. And that's your audio showing. Kidding. Not the audio showing of the week. So this week we're going to talk about ice dams. It is the winter here in Minnesota. We haven't had an opportunity for ice dams yet. I'd imagine into the future we will.
My text size is set right in the middle.
Josh is also changing his text size because I recently found out that he's texting at the grandpa level, but his oldest child is what, 8?
Hey, look at how small my text size is now.
Now his text size is smaller. He's now texting at just the 2-kid text size.
This guy gets LASIK and all of a sudden everyone else can't see.
Let's talk about ice dams. What do we got, AJ? What's an ice dam?
An ice dam is a bunch of ice on your roof that tends to lift up your shingles and get water into your house.
You look at it and you
How
go,
do you get it?
damn, a lot of ice.
A lot of ice.
Can we swear on this podcast?
That wasn't. No, it was dam. Like it's a dam.
Yeah, that's like
How
the
do you
water
get-
ice is about to break.
How do you get an ice dam on a house? What causes them? Which houses have the highest risk of ice dams?
Typically, you get ice dams when you have poor insulation because the heat from your house rises. So the heat goes up and it gets into your attic space, and then it warms up enough to melt the snow on the underside of like the packed amount of snow that you have. And eventually it thaws and freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws and freezes, builds up. Snow and shingles are meant to hold snow, so snow doesn't really get underneath and into shingles, but typically, if you get that thaw, freeze, eventually that ice is starting to work its way underneath the shingles, and you get a thaw, and then it will get underneath onto the sheathing and cause leaks in your house and all sorts of other unsightly things. One thing to note is good ventilation is also an important thing to avoid ice dams. So you do want your attic space, at least here in Minnesota, to be about the same temperature as outside. So if your insulation is sufficient, it is holding all the heat in your house and not letting any of it escape into your attic. But you also want air to flow through your attic from the outside to make sure that that temperature kind of stays moving and in that same way. We know what houses are at the greatest risk for them is the ones with the least amount of attic space, because you A, have a harder time with ventilation, and B, you have a harder time with insulation. So all three of us have homes where you have a ceiling of your top level and you go above that and there's just a standard attic. It's probably 4 feet tall in the middle. You can blow in 16 inches of insulation up there safely. You can ventilate them very, very well and no issues. We, however, own several rental properties that are half-story homes, which really only have attic space on beyond the knee walls on each side, and then they have the sheetrock really screwed up against the roof rafters, oftentimes really on a 2x4 or a 2x6 type setup. Well, in that case, you only have 3.5 to 5.5 inches of potential space to have insulation. So when we finish them,
and it's been finished since 1950, so you have no idea how much
lots of newspaper.
Is
yeah,
left.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we've finished them in the past, where we actually have access to that space, we will spray foam them in what's called a hot roof. That creates a very large R value in a very small amount of space. So you don't need necessarily 16 inches. I want to say spray foam gives you 1.7 or 2, I think, per inch on closed cell spray foam. We can fact check that after this. I don't know if that's correct, but it doesn't take as much spray foam in terms of the depth of it to achieve a higher R value, which is really, really nice. And it eliminates more opportunity for heat to get through and actually melt the snow and then freeze and cause an ice dam.
If you are seeing ice dams on a house or your house has ice dams, what's the suggestion on how to either mitigate? Because key point here, an ice dam in itself isn't going to cause water to come isn't going to be an issue unless it causes water to come into the house. An ice dam has to build up quite a bit for that to happen. So you can have an ice dam and not have water in your house. If you do see an ice dam and you don't yet have water in your house, what's something you can do to maybe mitigate the fact that might come in, and how to stop it?
Well, it's pretty difficult in the winter to solve most of these problems, just because being outside or getting into your attic or doing those sorts of things is just not as enjoyable when it's freezing cold. So most people would suggest, obviously, knocking any icicles off your roof. They can be dangerous, and they're also making it harder for some of that water that is melting to slide off of the roof. So keeping your gutters clean all fall is very, very important, because if they're packed full of stuff, you can get water building up in there and causing the ice to rise. But just getting a roof rake and raking your roof, being very careful that you don't damage your shingles, can make a big difference. There's a lot of folks in St. Louis Park every year when we drive through the neighborhoods where we own homes, where they're raking a lot of the snow off of the roof, because if there's no snow on the roof, then there's less opportunity for it to melt and cause an ice dam.
Exactly.
So, and I did just look it up. Closed cell spray foam is 3.5 R value per inch of foam. So,
huge.
Which I suppose that makes sense, because on 6 inches you get just like 20-ish.
Yeah, and blow-in insulation is, I think, just under 3, because 17 inches gives you an R49, which is new construction code in attics. But blown-in cellulose insulation doesn't always achieve a perfect, a smooth amount of insulation. So you'll end up with issues oftentimes in these homes where even on the knee wall, they rolled in some insulation, but they missed a couple of spots, and heat is still finding its way through those areas. Whereas a closed cell spray foam, if it's sprayed at the exact same depth, will achieve the exact same R value no matter where you're looking at it. So if you shot a thermal gun on closed cell spray foam, it should look really evenly insulated. Whereas sometimes people have walked on the insulation, or the cellulose is blown around or whatever, and you're getting a more inconsistent move.
Josh only has 4 minutes.
I think high level, we're talking about a lot of detail house stuff here, right? So one is, the newer the house, the better your insulation is likely to be. So if it's an older house, you have more likelihoods of there being risk there. We just did a podcast on inspections, and they will look at the attic during the inspections. That's another way you can learn, is my house properly insulated, or is there a need for more of it? If you're having issues with the amount of insulation you have, you may have issues with ice dams. And if your house is built in certain ways, or certain areas that have these places where there's less insulation for it to work, you're more likely to have issues with ice dams. So be more precautious in the winter months in Minnesota to try to ensure there's less snow on your roof if you're more at risk for ice dams building up.
The first time you show a house to a buyer that has that hot roof, where you're in a half story and you're built directly up against the roof line, I would just make sure you explain it to them, make sure it's something they should look out for. I wouldn't not buy a house, obviously, because we own a lot of them.
No, but just be prepared and be ready to take care of it.
And your buyer should know, though. If you didn't tell your buyer and then they buy a 1.5 story, they're like, what the heck, why didn't you tell me about this possibility? They should know about it, teach them about it, make sure they understand.
And I think one easy way to do this is, after a large snowstorm, if you are going the next week through a neighborhood, you can tell which homes have good and bad insulation by how much snow stays on the roof.
That's a fun game.
Yeah. So if you see one roof that has packed all the way high, it's like they probably just have re-insulated their roof. If then you see the neighbor's house and there's hardly any snow on it, it's like they probably don't have as good insulation. That's why all the snow has been melting off of that roof. Well, if we have a deep freeze right after we have a good snow on a house like that, they're going to have that melt happen, and then they're going to have that freeze happen, and that's when you can have that issue.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And that's all we have this week on the Nerdy Agent Podcast Audio Showing of the Week.
Bye.
We talk about audio showings and stuff like ice dams.